So a couple weeks ago, I shared with you a video about my top tips for shooting stop motion animation and how to really make that look more professional. And one of the things that I shared in that video was the software that I use called Dragonframe. So I wanted to spend some time in this video sharing with you some of my favorite features in Dragonframe, things that maybe first time using it you didn't know were there, but are incredibly helpful. Hey there, I'm Joni. Like I said, today we're playing with stop motion animation, which is perfect timing because I just came off a week of shooting stop motions for one client. I'm headed into shooting some more for another one in 2 weeks. So there's definitely a lot of demand for this out there. And so I want to share with you some of my favorite tools that are inside of Dragonframe, because you can certainly capture stop motion with all sorts of different tethered options, but some of the very specific features that are helpful for animators that are in Dragonframe, that's what I want to share with you today. Now, this is a paid software, which to me, again, for the amount of work that I'm doing for clients and how it elevates my final product, it's well worth the investment. But now if you do just want to play around with the software, they do offer a free trial version. So you can experiment with it and see if it's going to fit your needs. I'll link that down below. Now, if you're brand new to stop motion animation, you're brand new to Dragonframe, I would definitely recommend checking out my earlier video on tips for stop motion, which kind of lays a little bit more groundwork there, gives you a better general overview. But effectively what we're doing here in Dragonframe is that this is a tethered capture software. So this enables us to see what our camera sees, that I've got my camera set up, mounted overhead, and then I've got that camera connected to my computer, which is then feeding into Dragonframe. I have the Dragonframe software open and I'm able to see what the camera sees. And then I can also take the individual pictures. So these strawberries, which I want to animate, I take a picture and then I move them just a little bit, take another picture, move them a little bit, continue to do that, so on and so forth, until you have like 100 frames of moving strawberries. You play that through and there they get to dancing. But now if you've been here on the channel before and you've seen my studio and my setup, you can see I've got a bit more going on here now than I did before. So I've added a third screen so that I can see even bigger when I'm shooting tethered. I use this specifically for Dragonframe as well as in Capture One too, but particularly for Dragonframe, and you'll see these features used here in just a moment, but it really allows me to see really big exactly what's going on. So much of a successful stop motion video in a lot of ways is really understanding the continuity and the movement from one frame to the next, and that if something gets bumped or something gets changed, like being able to line things up just right as they were before. And the bigger screen for my older eyeballs allows me to do that. So yes, we have screen overload. This is perhaps excessive, but I gotta say, it's really made my life a lot easier. And so I think that was like a $300 TV from Costco. It wasn't like top of the line or anything. I just literally needed an extra view monitor and it's been helpful for me. So now really focusing in on Dragonframe and its features that I love. So the first features are located in the guide layer section. There are all sorts of goodies in this area. The first and foremost one that I use every single time is the aspect ratio mask. So this is incredibly helpful when we know where our intended video is going to be going. So like when I shoot a video for vertical, right, that it's going to go maybe on Instagram stories or it's going to go on TikTok, that we want that 9:16 aspect ratio. And so I can punch that in here into Dragonframe and then suddenly it's going to pop up those bars for me. And then I can kind of fade those in and out depending on like how intensely I want to be able to see that or be able to see what's underneath of it. Because there's also plenty of times too where I may be shooting knowing that this is going to go, say for example on TikTok, but it also may be going into the Instagram feed, which is 4:5, in which case I can also turn on then kind of in this same area the alternate composition lines so that I can also see then that 4:5 overlaid with the 9:16. And then I know that as long as I keep most of my primary action within those rails, within those guides, that I'm going to be safe and I'm going to be able to create those final assets without any cropping issues. So moving on to the next feature that I love to use, it's also in the guide layers section, and it's the drawing layers. So what this allows me to do is to draw on top of the live view where I want to kind of map the object to be moving to, so that we know these strawberries, for example, are going to move in a particular pattern, that they're going to kind of snake up and out of the scene. And so I can go ahead and draw that line so that then as I am moving those strawberries, that I know that it's staying in line, that it's not going to be jumping all over the place, because there's a really nice fluid look that you get that looks just a bit more continuous, a bit more professional. You know, again, to each their own in terms of the style and the look that you're trying to go for. But in terms of that continuity and that fluid look, it really helps to follow a straight line. So you can draw those straight lines in. And we can draw those as straight lines or curved lines or freestyle lines or shapes. So you have kind of all those standard drawing options. You can change the colors, you can change the thickness, but then also inside of this, you can also use the increment editor, which this is the kind of like taking it one step further, that if you want a subject like the strawberries to go from point A to point B, and we want to do that in a very predictable increment, like we want 20 stops from, you know, this first stop to the final stop, and we want it to go 20 movements between, that we can go ahead and put in 20. And then it's going to go ahead and provide these little hash marks, which we can change the shape and orientation of those. And then as we are taking our shots, then we take the strawberry at 1, and then we move it to the next notch, and to the next notch, and to the next notch. You can even preview what that motion is going to look like by activating the little circle or the square and playing it through. And it's going to show you also then what's that action going to look like before you even do the action. I mean, when I figured that one out, this is like, oh, mind blowing. And for those drawing layer masks, we can create multiples of those. So if you want to plan out your entire storyboard, draw it all out, and then come into Dragonframe and then physically like create those different lines, those different actions, and create multiple different scenes, and then just turn them on as you need them as you're doing the different actions. So then next up, another favorite feature, I would say this is like an essential feature. This is something that, like, even if you don't use any of the other features that are in the software, like this one, this makes it all worth it, is the ability to play through all of the shots that you've captured, but then not only just play them through, but play them through at different frame rates. So when we talk about a frame rate, that is how many images are stacked into a second. So you may, for example, like this video that I'm recording right now is being filmed at 24 frames per second. So per second of video footage, the camera is actually capturing 24 still images of me, stacking them all together in sequence, playing it through, and it creates fluid motion. And 24 frames per second is kind of generally standard for most video out there, 24 to 30, kind of depending on the look and the application of that particular video. But when you have 24 frames per second, it's got kind of this nice connected fluid look to it. You can also capture it, say for example, 120 frames per second or 60 frames per second. We consider those kind of higher frame rates, packing in a lot more images into every single second, which enables us to slow down that footage while still having a connected look. So when we go for like that slow-mo B-roll, that's usually captured, like say for example, at 120 frames per second. But in stop motion animation, stylistically, we can dip into those slower frame rates. For example, 10 frames per second or 12 frames per second. And you can see as we toggle down here at the bottom, we can kind of get a sense of how it will look differently if we run a video at 12 frames per second versus 24 frames per second. Now, without getting into the weeds of video capture and frame rates and kind of that bigger conversation, which honestly like deserves its own dedicated video, when it comes though to shooting stop motion animations, for me personally, I shoot it with the intent to create the video at 24 frames per second in terms of when I'm setting up my sequence in Adobe Premiere, or if you're using Final Cut Pro, whatever your video editing software is, that final video, I will put it together at 24 frames per second. And so if I want a 24 frames per second final video, then that means if I want that 12 frames per second look, I will want to take 2 shots of each individual frame so that then that looks like 12 frames per second, even though it's on a 24 frames per second video. And I know, you know, if you're not a math person, or if you don't know, like you've never worked with frame rates and frames and video editing before, that might be a little bit of a mind bender. But just imagine that if we clicked on 24 frames per second here in Dragonframe, but instead of 1 individual frame per movement, I'd taken 2 individual frames per movement, that it would look like when I run it at 12 frames per second. Does it make sense? So when you get into the world of animation and you hear reference to the idea of shooting in ones and shooting in twos, the idea of shooting in ones is if you are at 24 frames per second, all 24 of those frames are individually different, a different movement and a different action. That's going to have a very fluid, connected look. Whereas if you shoot it in twos, so 24 frames, that in those 24 frames, there's actually only 12 different images, each duplicated. So 2 of this one, 2 of this one, 2 of this one, and so on and so forth across 24 frames. It's going to have like a jerkier, kind of more playful sort of feel, which you can see when we toggle between 12 frames versus 24 frames per second. It's a different look and it's a different feel. Neither one is better. It's just a matter of what's the look you're going for. And there is definitely something playful and fun about 12 frames per second or shooting in twos. But now what I will say is most of the videos that I create for my Instagram Reels and TikTok and for clients, I'm using a combination of ones and twos. So I effectively shoot it all, you know, one single frame at a time, and then I may duplicate frames then when I get into the editing process to get that jerkier, sort of more fun animation, playful look in the final product, but then also having periods in those videos that are more smooth and connected. But all that to say, I use this feature inside of Dragonframe for every video, more or less to just get a sense of what the video is going to look like if I play it at that slower frame rate versus the 24 frames per second, kind of toggling between the two to get a sense of how it's going to look then when I go in to edit this video all together. So I'm not actually changing the frame rate when I'm in here. I keep it at that 24 frames per second because I know that's what I'm going to create once I go over into Adobe Premiere. But this is just that way to kind of play around with it and see how it may look differently so that I'm prepared for the edit. And so then last but not least of my favorite features here in Dragonframe, this final one is one that when people see it in action, they go, oh, that is so helpful, is the onion skin feature. So the idea here is that as we're taking these individual shots, it's sometimes nice to be able to see in your live view what was your previous shot while still also being able to see where your object is going. So we can turn on this onion skin feature here by toggling here along the bottom, and you can see like one image back, multiple images back. You can have, you know, the back one be a little stronger or lighter. You have a lot of customizations in here, but effectively, if we just pull this little slider, it's going to reveal what the prior frame was. We see the live view, which you can see in kind of like this ghostly onion skin, right? You think of onion skin as very translucent. And so we can see then the hand in there with the strawberry and where it's going, kind of anticipate that movement, but see where it has been. So we can see how far we've gone. But this is also incredibly helpful for if you ever bump or you move something, you want to be able to put something back to exactly where it was. We can ensure that we can perfectly line that up by using that onion skin feature. So those are my favorite features inside of Dragonframe. Again, if you want to play with this software, download it for yourself. It's linked down below. This video is not sponsored by Dragonframe. It's a software that I purchased and paid for and use in my business, but I thought you might also find super helpful. And if you want to learn more about stop motion animation, I am planning some upcoming workshops and other additional lessons. So if you want to hop in on that, you want to be a part of it and know what's happening, feel free to join my email list. It is linked down below. But with that, I hope you have a fantastic day. You stay out of trouble, and I'll see you soon, all right? Bye.